Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm JD Davidson. There's a good chance standardized test scores are going to go up in Wisconsin. But before you get too excited, the reason for the increase most likely has little to do with students actually performing better. Instead, the state's moving ahead with plans to change the language and the scoring of those tests. Joining us today is Ben Yount, Wisconsin contributor for the Center Square. And Ben, why does the state think a change is necessary, and what does all this mean?
The explanation from Wisconsin State Superintendent is fairness and clarity. The way that the test has been scored, and by the way, we have a long history in Wisconsin of moving the goalposts, to borrow the opening of the NFL season phraseology. The superintendent was on TV in Milwaukee earlier in the week and said the way that the scores currently are, the old scores, the scores are going to be replaced this year. The old scores made it look like kids were doing worse than they were. And she said the categories, you were either advanced, proficient, basic, or below basic. That was hurting kids' feelings. So they wanted to change this. Now, the reality is that most kids in Wisconsin, when you take a look at either the elementary school test or the ACT, which is essentially the test for high schoolers, most of those kids are below basic. They don't know how to read or write or do math at grade level. The number that we throw out quite often is 2/3 of kids in the state. About 2/3 of kids in the state don't read or write at grade level. That's not good. When you get into certain specific school districts, say Milwaukee, and certain specific schools, those numbers change dramatically for the worse. You can find some schools in Milwaukee where you've got single-digit percentages of kids who can read and write at grade level, which means 90-something% of kids that are coming out of that high school aren't up to the standards. Quentin Claiborne, who we talk to frequently, he's with the Institute for Reforming Government, was very clear, and he said that this is going to upend any attempt to compare apples to apples, kids from 3 years ago to kids going forward. And this is going to confuse parents. The way that he put it was, when you say that kids are developing, because that's the new line. It's still advanced, and it's no longer basic and below basic. It's approaching and developing. Well, when you hear that kids are developing their reading skills, that sounds positive, right? That sounds like, oh, hey, they're almost there. He's almost got it. When in reality, it's below basic, and children aren't able to read or write. And so the idea here that this is going to provide clarity to parents, I'm not so sure. The idea that this is going to be fairer to kids, that remains to be seen. But you're exactly right. Scores are going to jump under these new tests, because when you move the bar lower, a lot more kids can get over that bar. It's true in anything. And if all of a sudden they made 400 pounds, if you're anything below 400 pounds, you're not fat. You're healthy. Well, I got healthy really fast.
You're developing healthy.
Yeah, I'm developing healthy. I'm approaching healthy.
I'm developing my long distance running skills, but I am sure not ready for Boston. This happens in every state across the country. It seems like every 3 or 4 years. And I want to go back. I think it all kind of started with the second President Bush and the No Child Left Behind, and there were state rankings and things like that. And then all of a sudden, which was fine, we've got something that we're ranking schools on, and okay, we can after a while we'll figure this out and we'll understand what it all means and know if our school is good, bad, or not. And I think that's all parents want to know. Is my school good? Is my school bad? Is my school getting better? What's frustrating to me is when we continually change it, and every state seems to do this, they change not the test, but they just change their language. And the Institute for Reforming Government's right. It's frustrating. Parents don't have a sense. And I'm almost to the point where parents don't care anymore because they can't figure this stuff out.
It is a useless measure, because not only does it not tell you where your child is, it lumps it together statewide. And look, here in the Milwaukee suburbs, my kids go to ostensibly the third or fourth best school in the state, but my kids didn't have all A's. So where does that put them? Is it that they're not doing the work? Is it that they're not being taught? Like we say, when you go into Milwaukee, there are some schools in Milwaukee where you can get an excellent education, certainly choice schools. But when you look at Milwaukee public schools, the idea of measuring schools to make sure that teachers are actually teaching and not just reading comic books in the classroom, that's a great idea. But like you said, with No Child Left Behind and all that federal money on the line, it started to encourage gamesmanship. The scam that it used to be is you'd come in because juniors would take the test in high school, right? And you come in, oh, hey, guys, you, and you, the paperwork says you missed a gym class credit last year, so you're now sophomores. You don't have to take the test tomorrow. And then they come back in the next week after the test. And so, guys, it was a electronic mistake. Sorry, you're juniors now. You're going to graduate. And so they would pull these kids out before test level. Quentin Claiborne, again, really smart guy. And you can find him on Twitter. But he explained how this is going to skew the numbers, but only for a little while. And this is part of the frustration, is that the federal government is still checking how our kids are doing when it comes to reading, writing, and math.
So these scores will be the highest in over a decade, probably 15 years. That is simply a fact. And so what I want to do is give people who are listening a tip. This, in a couple of months, the NAEP, N-A-E-P, this is the national test that does not change its standards. It's the standard that actually Wisconsin copied when we had those high standards. So N-A-E-P, NAEP, those results are going to come out. They're going to compare Milwaukee to other cities, and they're going to compare Wisconsin to other states. And every year we come up flat. We never improve while other states pass us by. And I'm really worried. I'm worried that we're not even going to stay put next year. I'm worried we're going to drop because these changes seem very just interesting at this point in time. So look up the NAEP in a couple of months and see where Wisconsin ranks. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to be disappointed. I think the question then is, what are we going to do about it?
And that's where, again, we go back around and around and around as to DPI can just go ahead and change the scores. It's going to take some very heavy lifting at the legislature to intervene to come up with a system that works. And all the while, parents aren't going to know how well their kids are learning. Remember, we're still working those COVID classes through. The kids who were freshmen in high school have now graduated. You're having kids go into high school now who maybe didn't really even finish junior high, much less the end of elementary school. And by changing these both scores and the language, by going from below basic to developing, we've erased any ability to track that. In Wisconsin, we knew that we essentially lost 2 years of learning, and now we're never going to be able to prove that or show that, except for when kids graduate and they can't, as Claiborne described it, write a simple email. These are young people who are being robbed of an opportunity to have a productive life as young men, as young women. And that's really the shame, that this isn't just about covering for the teachers union or are we being too namby-pamby with kids. At the end of the day, we're going to have another generation of young men, young women turned out of school who didn't get an education, and they're never going to have an opportunity to get that back.
Well, one thing's for sure. In a couple of months, we'll check those other scores and see where the state stacks up against everyone else. Ben, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.